We departed Gainesville, Florida at about 6:45 on Wednesday morning. The sun hadn't yet come up, and the tower actually hadn't even opened by the time that we got in the airplane and got everything pre-flighted. There was a bit of dew on the airplane, and we used paper towels to wipe everything off, and of course, what's left on the windshield and the body heat from getting inside the airplane creates a nice fogged up windshield. But it wasn't long after that we were off, we were in the air, and the sun started to rise, and there was a beautiful glow at the horizon. Unfortunately, for this flight, there was a problem with the camera that was recording cockpit audio, and so we only have a couple of different camera angles. So you're stuck with me narrating this flight. I've chosen to speed it up a little bit because there's no reason for you to sit through 97 miles of flying, even though we had a very, very nice tailwind, and I think that we were making almost 200 knots over the ground. So we really had a wonderful, beautiful flight, and it gave us an opportunity to really get some nice pictures. I mounted my cell phone in a cell phone camera holder out the left pilot window and got a really nice time lapse of the sun rising. And having flown so many years in New Hampshire, where although the field elevations are not particularly high, there are a lot of mountains and a lot of rugged terrain. It's really nice to come down to the southeast, especially in Florida, to see everything is at sea level. The idea that you can fly at 2,000 feet and look down and see nothing but flat sea level terrain below you is really reassuring, except of course when you start flying over the swamps and the Everglades, and to contemplate the reality that if you go down you're going to be eaten alive by the alligators if you happen to survive the crash. Anyways, not to get too morose, but as we continued flying south and making the occasional turn to the east, the sky got brighter, the sun got higher, and the land below us became more inhabited and showing more signs of life. Of course, by this point, we were well within the boundaries of the Tampa area class Bravo, and all of the significant jet traffic and other general aviation aircraft that happens to be flying around in that airspace, not to mention all of the sun and fun traffic converging on that particular area. We're approaching the Lakeland area from the northwest, but in order to execute the Lake Parker arrival procedure correctly, we need to position the plane so that we are heading westbound over the power plant toward the highway. So that really requires us to reposition the plane for an entry from the northeast over the power plant into the Lake Parker arrival procedure. Now, last year, being the first time that I had flown into Lakeland, it was hard to tell what was what, but the power plant is pretty obvious and the lake is pretty obvious. And this time around, it was relatively easy to pick out the landmarks just from visual recollection of what they were from last year and to fly the arrival procedure from memory, although I did read through the arrival procedure NOTAM for the area several times before entering into the airspace. And now you can see that we have the airplane relatively well positioned for an approach from the north-northeast to cross over that power plant. When we cross over the power plant, we're going to turn due west and we're going to follow a 4-lane road. So entering the Sun and Fun arrival for our category of aircraft, we are to maintain 1,200 feet MSL and 100 knots. For aircraft that are unable to safely maintain 100 knots, they need to fly at 1,700 feet MSL, just 500 feet above, and maintain 150 knots. Now at this point, if you're not paying attention, it would be easy to miss the intersection of Interstate 4 and the 4-lane road, where we have to turn southwest bound and continue along for approximately 3 nautical miles according to the NOTAM. Now we need to be on the lookout for a golf course and a tower shaped like a wedding cake to the east, and then a white water tower to the west. From that point, 3.5 nautical miles south is Lakeland Airport. Now the NOTAM has us on the lookout for a large V-shaped building, and when we get to that large V-shaped building right on our left-hand side, we're going to turn south and be on the lookout for the large blue-roofed terminal building for the Lakeland Airport. Now at this point, we are also receiving instructions from air traffic control. They're referring to us as white Cirrus and white low wing, and they're calling our pattern. So you're going to see very shortly that we're going to be making our right downwind, and they've instructed us to land on runway 9 left. Now, runway 9 left is really the taxiway, but it's bigger than most runways at a lot of small municipal airports. They're calling our downwind, they're calling our base, and they're going to tell us where on the runway we need to land. Now you can see that I'm setting up for a more extended downwind, but the controller is interacting with me and calling white Cirrus or white low wing, start your base turn now. Now that's a pretty tight base turn for a traditional pattern, but this is not going to be a traditional pattern. You can start seeing the airport come into view off the left-hand side of the screen. And not only are we going to be landing on the taxiway, but we're going to be landing 2/3 of the way down the taxiway. Now the taxiway is 75 feet wide, and on the taxiway there are two dots. A green dot about, I don't know, maybe a third to a half of the way down, and then 2/3 or so of the way down there's an orange dot, which was very, very difficult to see because the sun was washing out the color. We were instructed to land on the orange dot, which is the second dot, and the controller is instructing us to continue our turn to final in and not to land before the orange dot. At this point it's all just instinct and stick and rudder to make sure that you establish the correct visual glide path to not touch down prior to the dot and not touch down too far afterward, because there's not really a whole lot of runway left afterward. And you can see from this vantage point it looks like I'm pretty high on the approach, but I'm really not. The orange dot is still a ways away, and I have full flaps in, and I'm coming in at around 75 knots, which is what I would expect to come over the fence at for an airspeed on a traditional landing. So you can start seeing that dot come into focus, and you can see that I'm bleeding off a lot of that altitude. I've still got a decent amount of forward speed, and right as I get into ground effect, maybe, I don't know, 10 feet over the ground, I basically cut the power and I'm on the ground in a relatively short amount of time. And the rollout involves crossing an intersecting runway, which is a bit rough because there's a bit of a crown to the runway, so the water rolls off of it, and you're essentially crossing over the crown of the runway, and then you get to continue along the taxiway, which is flat, so it's a bit strange, but not a big deal. And then we continue the taxi along the route that's followed by the cones, and we'll cross the approach end of runway 27 until you get to these marshals, which are using some of the strangest and most unconventional hand gestures that I've seen. Then we taxi along parallel to runway 27, heading westbound toward the general aviation camping, where we're going to meet up with a motorcycle escort who continues us along, and he's kind of our pace car. He's the guy that will essentially tell us how fast we should taxi, and he's responsible for guiding us in the right direction. And eventually we're going to get down to the general aviation camping section, which will require that we taxi on the grass, which is not a whole lot of fun in my airplane under these circumstances, heavily laden with both fuel and gear and supplies and so on. And anyone that was there will tell you that there was a bit of rain the prior evening and maybe even into the morning before we got there, and so it was very spongy, and it really required a significant amount of power and effort to taxi. And I noticed that if I backed off the throttle at all, the airplane really had a tendency to want to sink and to slow down almost instantly. It had me a bit concerned, actually, because the power that was required to keep the airplane moving forward seemed to be increasing as I got a little further into the grass and into the field. And you can probably see from the right-hand side of the picture here that there were airplane tire tracks, almost like mud tracks, that were developing in the grass, and it made it really, really hard. So I just kept the power in and managed to push along. And as I came upon this right turn up here down toward our row of campsites, it became increasingly difficult, and it became clear to me that we weren't going to make it all the way into our camping spot. So I wish you could hear the audio here. I'm really cranking up the engine power here, and especially now I'm losing a lot of momentum as I'm being asked to make this right turn right into our camping spot up here. And something became a bit concerning to me, actually. You can see the marshal flagging us in, and I'm in at 20 inches of manifold pressure now. This is almost cruise power, and it's 64% power, I believe. And at this point, I'm stopped. I've got 21 and a half, almost 22 inches of manifold at the max, and I decided I'm just not going to continue. So I backed off the power, and the marshal's like, come on, keep going, keep going. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I'm making the call here. I'm not going to continue. I'm shutting the airplane down because all I need is to give this thing a little more power. The airplane leaps out of the little divot that it created, and I run into the guy, and that would not make for a good day for anybody. So we shut it down, and we were there until we left. And it was a wonderful place on the approach side of runway 9, so it's on the opposite end from where we crossed the runway after we landed the airplane. So every morning, this was the sunrise that we got to wake up and see, and all of these airplanes were neighbors right around us, and there were people making coffee and in the morning and grilling in the evening, and it was just a really, really awesome time. So if you like this video, we'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and that you subscribe to the channel and click the little bell icon next to the subscribe button so you're notified when we come out with new videos. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video.